The lake was still this morning. I liked it that way, glass-like, undisturbed, as if the world agreed to keep its voice down until I was ready to listen. My townhouse sat on the edge of a quiet hill above Lake Union steel and cedar bones, wrapped in matte stone. No art on the walls, no soft edges, just light silence and control. I made coffee with one hand while flipping through licensing renewals on my tablet with the other. My inbox pinged every few minutes. Vendor Approvals Lab reports a question from R&D about microfluidic channel calibration. All normal, all under my name, Dr. S. Calder. To the outside world, I was a founder, a visionary. To my family, I was just Soraya, the one who dropped out of real academia to freelance in God knows what. A consultant, a whisper of a career, something vague enough that no one had to ask questions or pretend to understand the answer. I preferred it that way most days. The knock on my office glass startled me. Rane didn't usually knock. She stepped in, holding a folder like it had caught fire. "You'll want to see these." I raised an eyebrow. Internal, external. Job portal. She handed me the folder. New executive applications, both verified. I opened it, half listening, until the names hit me like ice water. Lyra Gannett, Emryn Gannett. I read the names again slower this time, as if they might shift under scrutiny. But there they were, my sister, my brother-in-law, applying for VP-level roles at Exona Labs, my company. They can't possibly know I started. They don't, Ronnie said simply. No reference to you, no mention of your last name. They applied cold through the portal. I sat back in my chair, heart pacing faster than I wanted it to. Emryn had once called my work garden science. Lyra said I was drifting through theory like it paid the rent. And now they were crawling toward the same building they'd mocked for years, only they didn't recognize the foundation. I closed the folder slowly, my pulse finally steadying. So, they wanted in. Let's see how well they navigate blind. The last time I tried to explain my work, we were sitting around my mother's long dining table in Portland, just after the turkey had been carved, and before anyone was sober enough to feel shame. The house smelled like rosemary and citrus candles, flickering from every flat surface, and the fire crackled like a scripted background effect. My mother loved ambiance even when there was nothing ambient about the mood. I had been nervous, not visibly, but deep in that hollow part of the chest that tightens when hope is foolish. It was Thanksgiving 7 years ago, and I thought maybe, just maybe they might actually want to know what I'd been building. It's not theoretical. I began careful to keep my tone light. We're engineering biodegradable scaffolds using plant proteins. The goal is to help damaged tissue regenerate naturally. My sister Lyra didn't look up from her wine. So, like compost Band-Aids. A few chuckles floated across the table. My father didn't bother looking away from the football game playing silently over the kitchen bar. Emryn smirked. It's regenerative biomaterials. I continued forcing my voice to stay even. We've had early success with protein polymer blends that dissolve in the body after use. Minimal scarring, no surgical removal needed, sweetheart. My mother interrupted gently, like correcting a child who mispronounced a word. That's wonderful. But why don't you come help at the spa? We're looking for someone to manage product rotation. I stared at her. Product rotation? Well, the back room is always a mess, and I thought, since you're so interested in materials. My fork clinked softly against the plate. I remember that sound more than the words. The rest of dinner went on without me. Lyra discussed influencer packages for their new collagen mist. Emryn bragged about some vitamin campaign. No one asked me another question. That night, I drove back to my studio apartment and opened a new notebook. On the first page in black ink, I wrote, "Stop offering dreams to people who only trade in convenience." Then I circled it twice and underlined it once. The next morning, I emptied my savings account. The day after Thanksgiving, I transferred what was left of my savings into a new account. Then I filed the paperwork to access the trust my grandmother had left me, modest, but just enough. It was supposed to be for grad school, but I'd already earned my PhD. I figured building something that might change medicine counted as a form of continuing education. By the end of the week, I'd signed a lease on a back room behind a long-abandoned florist shop on the edge of the industrial district. The windows rattled in the wind. The pipes groaned. On rainy days, the roof wept, slow tears onto the linoleum floor. I bought tarps and buckets and told myself it was temporary. The lab bench came from a university surplus auction. The microscope was cracked but workable. The fume hood hissed like an angry cat, and the only refrigerator was one I stole from my old dorm room. It was enough. I named it Axona Labs, from an old root word meaning to knit together. That's what I was doing, binding pieces of overlooked science into something new, something functional, something mine. Of course I couldn't use my name, not just for privacy, but because I knew what my last name meant in certain circles, especially when pitching to conservative investors who saw women in science as mascots or flukes. So I signed the papers as Dr. S. Calder and created an identity simple enough to be taken seriously, ambiguous enough to be ignored. The first prototype took shape at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was sleep-deprived, half-starved, and listening to the gentle hum of the mini-fridge when I realized the blend had finally stabilized. The matrix held. The protein strands aligned perfectly with the polymer base. It wasn't beautiful, but it worked. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not even my old lab partner. I filed the provisional patent under the alias and opened a bottle of discount champagne from the corner store. I drank straight from the bottle, sitting on the cold concrete floor. By year 2, we had our first angel investor. The resume files sat unopened on my desk for most of the day. I had reviewed 3 regulatory proposals signed off on a supplier audit and finalized a clinical trial report before I let myself click on either name. Rane stood at the doorway watching. Still want me to delete them? No, I said, finally opening Lyra's first. Schedule interviews, intern conference room. Strip the names. Let the department screen them clean. She didn't blink. You want them cold, colder than they've ever felt. She nodded once and left without a word. I kept reading. Lyra's CV was dressed in self-inflated titles and recycled phrases. Strategic Wellness Director, Consumer Intuition, Specialist, Lead Visionary. No published data, no trials, no validation. I remembered the collagen water debacle. She'd flown 3 influencers to Tulum and posted photos of leafy drinks under a replenish your aura hashtag. The startup folded in 6 months. Emran's resume was worse. A splash of buzzwords and links to dead landing pages. He'd listed himself as a biosynergist and digital wellness optimizer, whatever that meant. I tried to imagine either of them in the same room as our analytics director. The thought was almost funny. They'd applied through the public portal, no back channel, no name drop, no hint of who I was. To them, Axona Labs was just another opportunity, just another door they could charm their way through. But this wasn't a brand launch or a family-funded boutique. It was science, precision, data, people's lives hanging in the margins. I stood and crossed the room to the wall monitor, tapping into the internal security feed. The intern conference room looked exactly as I remembered: gray chairs, one long table, no art, and the worst coffee machine in the building. Let them enter quietly, like the rest of the world. Let them feel the air they used to laugh at, the air I had earned. I turned the volume down low and leaned back in my chair. They wanted access. Let's see how they performed when the door opened. Lyra's resume was 7 pages long. That alone told me more than she meant it to. Buried in a flurry of italicized job titles and self-appointed roles, there wasn't a single data point, not one outcome. No revenue figures, no user retention metrics, not even a basic growth chart. Just phrases like vision steering and ecosystem recalibration. She called herself a strategic wellness architect. Her only verifiable project was the retreat in Sedona, 6 months of yoga smoothies and influencer live streams that ended with unpaid vendors and a quiet domain expiration. I opened Emran's application next and braced for impact. It read like he'd built it with a marketing thesaurus and a dartboard. Holistic virality architect, biosynergistic outreach coordinator, digital empathy funneling lead. The words stacked like bricks around a hollow center. There were no metrics, no links that worked. His proudest campaign led to a supplement site that now redirected to a page selling beard oil. The only video listed was a TEDx talk titled Scaling Compassion Through Clicks. I made it 38 seconds before closing the tab. Still, they both carried the tone of people used to being told yes, used to doors opening even when they had nothing to offer but polish and persistence. I sat back rereading the cover letters. They didn't just want positions, they expected them. Lyra wrote as if Exona needed her cultural vision. Emran listed leadership as one of his innate energetic assets. They applied like people who had never once had to prove their worth beyond their confidence. But this place wasn't built on charisma. It was stitched from sleep deprivation cold experiments, regulatory nightmares, and hard-earned trust. Exona didn't hand out shortcuts. It didn't reward performances. They didn't know the walls they were walking into. They didn't know the floor beneath them had been poured by the same woman they'd laughed off at Thanksgiving dinners. I closed both files and folded my hands. Tomorrow, the interviews would begin. The intern conference room was deliberately uninspiring. Gray plastic chairs, a table just wide enough to feel official, just cheap enough to feel unimportant. The coffee machine in the corner made a mechanical choking noise every 30 minutes as if in protest. No windows, no plaques, no comfort. Rane had set everything up precisely. No last names used, no advance context given. The department leads were prepped to interview blind as they would for any external candidate. Lyra arrived first as expected, sunglasses still on. She scanned the room with faint disapproval, then sat with the poised detachment of someone waiting for a bottle service menu. When handed a clipboard, she waved it off. I'm sure we'll get to the good part soon. Emran came in 10 minutes later, overly loud. He fist-bumped the receptionist, made a comment about startups and garages, then greeted Lyra with a grin, like they were partners in a prank. He called the space quaint. I watched from upstairs, the feed clear and silent. I stirred honey into my tea as the first interviewer entered. Dr. Maisel from R&D began gently asking Lyra to outline her understanding of degradation kinetics in protein-based biomaterials. Lyra blinked once, then launched into a speech about trends in eco-conscious skincare, mentioning algae influencers and a TikTok challenge involving charcoal masks. When asked to differentiate between temporary polymer blends and bioresorbable tissue scaffolds, she changed the subject entirely. Emran fared no better. Sam from Analytics pressed him for conversion data from his last campaign. He claimed virality doesn't need metrics, it needs momentum. When asked about FDA classifications, he pivoted to consumer trust and emotional activation. They talked a lot, but nothing landed. Their confidence held even as the questions outpaced their substance. Lyra smiled too often. Emran leaned back like he was waiting for applause. They had always been good at making noise. I sipped my tea and took notes. When the last interviewer left the room, they were still chatting, still unaware. Then I stood, smoothed the hem of my jacket, and walked toward the elevator. The moment I stepped into the room, the air shifted. They didn't look up at first. Lyra was scrolling through, her phone legs crossed in that way she always used to signal boredom. Emran was slouched with one arm draped over the back of the chair, still wearing that smug ease that passed for confidence. "Excuse me," I said evenly. Lyra glanced up, blinking behind her lashes. "Can we help you?" I closed the door behind me. No badge, no introduction. I didn't need one. "I'm the founder of Exona Labs," I said, stepping forward. "And I'm also your sister." Emran sat up slowly. Lyra's lips parted slightly like she hadn't heard right. Silence stretched thick and brittle. "No," she said at last, shaking her head. "You consult here. You told Mom you were consulting. I told Mom what she could handle. And I never said who I was consulting for." Emrin let out a breath that was half a laugh. "This is some kind of joke, right?" I didn't smile. Instead, I dropped their printed resumes onto the table between us. "You weren't rejected because of who you are," I said. "You were rejected because you didn't know what you were talking about. Because you walked into a building built on real science, with nothing but recycled buzzwords and empty posture." Lyra's face reddened. "You think you're better than us because you made what Petri dish products and gave yourself a fake name?" "The name was never fake," I replied. "It was a boundary, one that kept me focused while the rest of you laughed at what you didn't understand." Emrin stood, then sat back down. He looked more confused than angry. I leaned forward, hands on the table, voice steady. "You failed the interview. Not because of our history, because you weren't ready. Because you still think presence matters more than preparation." Neither of them spoke. Not when I turned to leave. Not when the door clicked shut behind me. Downstairs, I could already hear the front desk greeting the next guests. My parents had arrived for their pitch meeting. I waited at the head of the long glass table. Fingers folded, gaze steady. The floor-to-ceiling windows cast a clean wash of light over the conference room. There were no assistants, no investors, no team. Just me. The door opened with a soft click. My father stepped in first, tailored suit jaw set. My mother followed a beat behind her heels, clicking like punctuation marks. Two junior execs from their spa chain trailed behind, clutching sleek leather folders and trying to hide the nervous energy buzzing off them. "Is this the right room?" one of them asked. "It is," I said, standing. "This is the meeting." They stopped short. My father's brows drew together. "Soraya." My mother blinked, her mouth slightly open. "What are you? I'm the one you're here to pitch," I said. "I'm Dr. Calder. I built Exona Labs." The execs looked from me to them, confused. I turned to them gently. "Thank you for coming. This meeting is now private." They hesitated. My father gave a small nod. They exited without a word. When the room was quiet again, I gestured to the table. "You can begin." They did. As if trying to regain footing, they launched into their deck, something about brand synergy, generational credibility, the alignment of clinical language with wellness language. It was polished. It was shallow. When they finished, I sat still for a beat. "There will be no partnership." My mother flinched. "Why not?" "You're not looking for innovation," I said. "You're looking for a marketing mask. A science-sounding sticker for a product line that doesn't meet clinical thresholds." My father's face hardened. "You're being emotional." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being decisive, which is what this role requires." My mother's voice cracked. "We didn't know. You never told us. You never asked." I stood. "This meeting is over." They didn't argue. My father rose slowly. My mother's hands trembled, but she followed. Neither of them looked back as I held the door open. Later that night, I sat alone in my living room and drafted a short, hand-addressed invitation. The next morning, I placed 4 cards in individual envelopes, handwritten and sealed in quiet ink. No logo, no flourish. Just a simple address and a time. One night only. Dinner. My home. They came. Not all at once and not confidently. Lyra arrived first, looking unsure for once, her voice smaller than I remembered. Emrin followed, trying to make a joke, but abandoning it halfway through. My parents arrived together. My mother's eyes darted around the house as if trying to catalog the parts of me she'd missed. My father stayed silent, but his jaw clenched every time he looked at the artwork or the wine rack or the view. I had set the table myself. Clean linens, warm lighting, everything measured not for show but for balance. The food was quiet roasted vegetables, a spiced lentil dish, fresh bread I made that morning. I poured wine and sat without fanfare. No preamble, no toast, just one sentence. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for honesty. I won't shrink to make you comfortable again. No one spoke for a while. Lyra stared down at her napkin. Emran kept folding the corner of his bread. My father's eyes rested somewhere past my shoulder. My mother finally broke the silence. Can you tell us the whole story? I didn't respond immediately. I studied her face, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Then I nodded once. So I did. I told them about the first lease, the fume hood that shorted out twice in one winter, the protein scaffold that finally held after 17 failures. I told them about the nights I slept on the lab bench and the way I lied through every family gathering to protect what I was building. I told them about the patents, the grants, the first real investor who never even asked my last name. No one interrupted. No one defended themselves. When I finished, I picked up my glass and took a long sip of wine. The next morning, I woke before sunrise and got dressed without reaching for the Dr. Calder badge. The badge stayed in the drawer that morning. I didn't reach for it, didn't even glance toward the place where I used to clip it on like armor. No more aliases, no more half names. I walked into Exona Labs as myself, Soraya Flint. At reception, one of the newer interns looked up with wide eyes. "Morning, Dr. Calder," she said, automatically hesitating halfway through the title. "Just Soraya," I said, offering a small nod. "But yes, that's me." Word had already started moving faster than I expected. A tech blog posted something overnight. One of our former vendors must have tipped them off. The headline was clean and loud. The consultant who wasn't Exona CEO unmasked. The article was surprisingly accurate. No embellishments. Just a simple timeline from failed family dinners to biotech breakthroughs. I didn't flinch. By mid-morning, I stood in front of our full-team researchers, analysts, operations interns, even the kitchen staff. I'd never done an all-hands under my real name before. The room was packed. The silence was weightless but alert. I cleared my throat and began. For years, I thought invisibility was protection, I said. And for a while, it was. It gave me the space to build something real without distraction. But I've learned that safety and growth don't live in the same place. You can't innovate in hiding. You can't lead from behind a wall. No one interrupted. A few nods. A few eyes that didn't look away. I built Exona with all of you. Even when I wasn't using my name, I was never alone here. This company, this team, is the clearest thing I've ever stood behind. There was no applause when I finished, and I was grateful for that. The silence meant it landed. Later, back in my office, I sat at my desk and reread a short message my mother had sent the night before. "Thank you for dinner. We're proud. Even if it took us too long to say it." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need anything from them to feel complete. The most radical thing I ever created wasn't the tech. It was this life.